This is your typical Western teenager from the 90s.
He plays basketball, he's obsessed with Chicago Bulls, Air Max sneakers, and idolizes Michael Jordan. He attends prestigious school in Switzerland, hangs out at Disneyland, speaks multiple languages, and enjoys all the privileges of Western life.
And his classmates know him as Pak Un.
Yet, one day, the modest, well-educated young man becomes the leader of a small country. He promises to make life better for ordinary people, starts enormous construction projects,
And the world learns his real name, Kim Jong Un.
but the world also discovers his true legacy, building a powerful nuclear defense for his nation and securing for himself absolute power. And to maintain it, he doesn't hesitate to execute his own uncle and any opposition, seal the country's borders tighter than ever, and block any information from the Western world.
Ironically, the world where he was essentially raised.
Today, North Korea is a land of total secrecy. Escaping from there is practically impossible. But here's the thing, even those who manage to flee still often feel pride in their homeland, even as they fear it enough to risk their lives to leave.
Why would a nation under constant sanctions, unable at times even to feed its citizens, build nuclear weapons? Why didn't North Korea collapse like the Soviet Union or the Eastern European regimes? And why didn't it open its doors to Western capitalism like China or Vietnam? And most importantly, how does Kim Jong Un maintain his grip on power so tightly that 25 million North Koreans can't even imagine life without the Kim dynasty? North Korea, or officially Democratic People's Republic of Korea, has existed for 75 years. That's 5 years longer than the mighty Soviet Union lasted. Know this, in the same USSR, several different people took turns running the country, and they were, well, unrelated to each other.
But in North Korea, during that time, only 3 leaders have been in charge: Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and now Kim Jong-un. It's not hard to guess from their last names. It's clear that they all relate.
Grandfather, father, and son. So it's immediately obvious.
North Korea isn't about communism, the people's power, or even the party's rule. It's a personal regime of a specific family. Somehow, they control the population of millions for 75 years.
How is that even possible?
Let's rewind exactly 70 years. American planes flattened Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, without mercy.
900 tons of bombs rained down on a 20-square-mile area. Before the bombardier signals, mission accomplished.
Well, numbers like 900 tons of bombs over 20 square miles. Who can even picture that clearly? But here's the right answer. That's absolutely devastating.
During the Korean War alone, they dropped 200,000 bombs on Pyongyang. That's essentially 1 bomb per resident.
This guy here, Curtis LeMay,
commander of the United States Air Force at the time, proudly reported that his pilots had burned down every single house in North Korea and then complained there were no targets left.
Well, obviously, along with houses, they destroyed dams, flooded fields, and wiped out harvests. Those of you familiar with history might pause here. Well, wasn't North Korea the aggressor, attacking the South first? If not for American troops, wouldn't Kim Il-sung have seized the entire Korean peninsula? And you're absolutely right, that's precisely what happened. And for those unfamiliar, here's a brief recap. After World War II, Korea was divided. Communists in the north, pro-American allies in the south. On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces stormed into the south, quickly taking over 90% of its territory, except for a tiny area near Busan.
American troops supported by the United Nations intervened, counterattacked, and nearly captured the north themselves, obliterating everything in their path from the air.
China and the USSR didn't want American forces near the border. They intervened directly, pushing the conflict back to where it began, the 38th parallel. Eventually, in 1953, both sides exhausted themselves and a ceasefire agreement was signed. Since then, we had 2 Koreas, North and South. The South, supported by America, money, technology, and protection. The North, similarly backed by China and Soviet Union.
All this time until 1994, the country was ruled by just one man, Kim Il-sung. Initially just a wartime leader, he gradually transformed himself into the great leader. North Korean propaganda elevated him to the status of the son of the nation, practically turning him into God for North Korean people.
But how?
Remember the American bombing I've mentioned earlier, flattering cities and forcing people to live underground.
Objectively, that doesn't sound like a victory.
But Kim Il-sung somehow declared it exactly that, a victory in the Fatherland Liberation War.
Which, ironically, he himself had started by attacking his neighbor. But hey, he had the Soviet Union backing him,
generously paying the bills. Friendly communist nations sent engineers, architects and advisors who rebuilt North Korea. Surprisingly, at first even began developing faster than South Korea.
Kim Il-sung's prestige skyrocketed.
And imagine this, a shining socialist paradise emerging in a country where 80% of the population were recently peasants.
Naturally, the people were amazed and deeply grateful.
Riding this wave of patriotism, Kim Il-sung crushed all opposition and carefully crafted his own cult of personality, the cult of the father of the nation.
And here's a trick propaganda uses everywhere throughout history. It's all about caring for children. Just think about this. During the Korean War, Pyongyang lost about 1 million people. That number is staggering, especially when your local population was only 10 million. How many children were left parentless? So, what did Kim Il-sung do?
He ordered the construction of shelters and schools for children whose parents died as heroes of the nation. These children were fed, clothed, cared for and educated, but taught at the same time that their real father was Kim Il-sung himself.
A vivid example is the School for Children of Revolutionary Martyrs, opened at Kim Il-sung's birthplace.
Its graduates became the future elite of the armed forces and state security. The leader strategically raised the very people he'd later rely on. Today, however, North Korea also relies heavily on information technology. Just 10 years ago, at the start of Kim Jong Un's rule, Seoul was detecting 1.5 million cyberattacks from North Korea per hour.
That's 17 attacks every second.
Between 2016 and 2018, North Korean hackers stole over $1 billion from global cryptocurrency exchanges.
Clearly, even North Korea can't do without skilled IT specialists.
Now take a closer look at these propaganda paintings, mosaics and statues. Kim Il-sung appears not only as a father figure, but also as a loving mother. Notice how tenderly he embraces children, wounded soldiers, peasants and the elderly.
This is no accident.
Every religion, cult or sect leverages family values, trying to replace the traditional family unit. Do you think it's just coincidence or something I made up? Consider this. Kim Il-sung's father was a school teacher. His mother, the daughter of a school principal. Both were faithful Christians in Eastern Korea.
Another detail. Kim Il-sung idolized Joseph Stalin, who initially studied to become a priest before establishing his own openly religious personality cult in an officially atheist country. Don't misunderstand, I'm not suggesting every child of teachers or priests becomes a dictator, but Stalin and Kim knew precisely what they were creating. I'm highlighting the framework from which this ideal dictatorship emerged. Let's dig even deeper. Why does the state want to replace the family? What does the family represent? It means care. And in North Korea's case, Kim Il-sung positioned himself as the ultimate caregiver. But family also means safety. That's where the nuclear weapons topic comes back in. Or, more precisely, the ambition to have them. Remember those brutal American bombings? Believe it or not, that wasn't even the worst-case scenario. The United States had something even more terrifying – nuclear weapons, exactly what they had dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You've probably heard those cities and seen pictures of their devastation.
The Commercial Museum was also within 2/10 of a mile of 0 point, and the garden wall facing the blast was bent inward by the push of the explosion.
In fact, it was precisely the American nuclear threats that ended the Korean War.
So, what did Kim Il-sung do?
He understood perfectly well that Americans could replicate Japan's strategy on North Korea at any moment. The recent war had clearly shown allies couldn't always be counted on to intervene quickly.
In 1964, North Korea established its nuclear research center in Yangban, aided by the Soviet Union, which even installed a reactor there. But the reactor wasn't a bomb yet, and Moscow wasn't eager to share that technology quickly. Why? 2 years earlier was the Caribbean crisis.
The United States placed missiles in Turkey, right near the Soviet Union. In response, the USSR deployed missiles in Cuba, near the United States. America didn't like that. They blockaded the island, and the world stood on the brink of nuclear war for 2 tense weeks. Thankfully, President Kennedy and Soviet leader Khrushchev reached an agreement. The USSR removed missiles from Cuba, the United States took theirs out of Turkey, and both sides promised not to attack Cuba. Crisis avoided, everyone was happy.
Except North Korea. They realized that Moscow could betray allies whenever convenient.
So North Korea couldn't rely on anyone, they had to build their own nuclear weapons. As a result, North Korea's military spending surged
from 4 to 5% of GDP in 1956 to 30% in 1966. And what followed?
People began practically worshipping Kim Il-sung, as he was said to have won the war, fed the people and provided healthcare. Well, at least that's how it looked from Pyongyang. However, after that, things weren't so rosy. The Soviet Union collapsed, China embraced capitalism, aid dried up, Kim Il-sung died, and North Korea faced the catastrophic famine in the 90s. Yet somehow, even under these dire conditions, the Kim dynasty held on tightly to power.
How? There are countless myths about North Korea, that people steal eat grass or officials supposedly get executed by machine guns for watching foreign movies. The more grotesque the lie, the easier it becomes to believe. When you see footage of people sobbing at the sight of their leader or clapping like robots, it seems plausible that any wild story about North Korea might be true. But in reality, the Kim regime is extremely calculating, otherwise it wouldn't have lasted so long. Look carefully. In the 90s, when the North Korea experienced a devastating famine and most of its people looked similarly starving, help was nowhere to be found, not from the dead Soviet Union, not from increasingly capitalist China. Eventually, humanitarian aid did come from the United Nations and, ironically, from North Korea's main enemies, the United States and South Korea. But even this help wasn't enough.
The North Korean government had to relax its grip slightly, permitting at least some private trade. Informal markets sprang up, smuggling thrived. State factories shut down, but men continued going to work, mostly out of habit, and earned practically nothing.
Unexpectedly, it was women who became the entrepreneurs. Traditionally, Korean women stayed home and raised children. But since their children were starving, these mothers started trading, becoming the backbone of emerging private enterprise. But too much private business was dangerous. That threatened regime stability, as had happened in the Soviet Union.
To preserve power, Kim Jong Un, the second Kim, came up with a brilliant solution: betting on the military. He declared the policy of Songun, army first, and he had 2 good reasons. First, North Korea's army was enormous, bigger even than Russia's, despite the country being 5 times smaller in population and much more smaller in area. If soldiers started to suffer economically, they would become dissatisfied, and dissatisfied soldiers, heavily armed, could easily topple the regime. Second reason, Kim Jong-il had just come to power following his father's death and desperately needed to assert authority. But the military didn't respect him much.
Not because he wore high heels or glasses like Liza Minnelli, although he did later top a humorous list of 25 men who look like old lesbians. No, his problem was a lack of military credibility. Just like his father before assuming power, Kim Jong-il had worked in propaganda, not on the battlefield.
To avoid being overthrown by the military, Kim had to sweeten the deal for the generals,
increasing military budgets and giving the army priority for food and cash.
Of course, Kim had his own personal calculations too. Why spend enormous sums on expensive nuclear program? Simply put,
It was to avoid the fate of someone like Muammar Gaddafi. Who was he?
the Libyan dictator whose regime fell when NATO forces intervened in Libya's civil war, leading directly to his death.
The moral is clear. Without nuclear weapons, you're vulnerable, open to invasion and overthrow at any moment.
It's obvious that today no Kim Jong Un will ever strike first with nuclear weapons. That would be suicide, guaranteeing a devastating American strike back.
But possessing a stockpile of missiles capable of hitting Washington, that's an argument to keep Washington from interfering. As the saying goes, no better protection than a hydrogen bomb and the reliable way to deliver it.
And the second crucial factor, as always, is Kim Jong-un constantly tells his people, look how strong and developed we've become under my leadership. We even threaten America. There is a widely accepted theory. Any regime can survive permanently
if it has three pillars.
First pillar, the general population must approve of the regime. In North Korea, propaganda spins grand tales of heroic leaders protecting the nation from external enemies. Second pillar, the military. Crucially, military elites must live comfortably, and the Kims have always understood this perfectly. Remember the figures about military spending, nuclear weapons and lavish privileges.
Third pillar, big business must support the regime. You might wonder, business in North Korea? But remember Kim Jong-il's slight losing of economic controls in the 90s? It created a new elite, the Donju, meaning money masters. These are high-ranking officials of the Workers' Party, military leaders, people who run state-owned companies, or who do business abroad. They are the ones trying to attract investment to North Korea or earning foreign currency. These could be officers from the security forces or married women who, believe it or not, aren't working for the state, but are instead in private trade. Today, these people have enough money to feel comfortable. And I'm not talking about North Korean won. This is real money. They make and spend normal enemy American dollars. Looking at all this closely, you might see Kim Jong-un is following a classic strategy straight from the playbook of Niccolò Machiavelli. Don't worry about the whole population. Just keep a small group of elites firmly on your side. Approximately 1% of North Korea's population now lives comfortably. They drive decent cars, relax at domestic resorts, enjoy ski slopes built by Kim Jong-un, engage in sports activities and even wear Western clothes tricking into a country. This group clings tightly to power because it guarantees their comfortable lifestyle. Here's a concrete example. Take North Korea's auto industry. North Korea attempts to produce copies of Chinese and Western cars. Now imagine this scenario. You're the owner of the car factory in North Korea, and your cars are at least somewhat marketable, generating profits. But then imagine suddenly the Iron Curtain falls. What happens next? Your modest factory would have to compete directly against giants like South Korea's Hyundai or the Chinese auto giant. Would your factory survive that competition? Not a chance. So, for people like this, the Kim regime guarantees their comfortable way of life. And the Kims need these elites, because these elites keep the regime financially afloat. Here's another example. Everyone jokes about the state-owned airline, Air Koryo, famous for its old Soviet-era IL-62s, ranked as a world's worst airline with no stars and just one daily flight. But domestically, Air Koryo actually runs a thriving business network. Taxis, gas stations, travel agencies, and even produces cigarettes and food under its own brand. This is a strange kind of public-private partnership. The government doesn't do logistics, production and sales, but maintains control and pockets a large share of profits. But hold on, according to South Korean intelligence, Kim Jong-un personally has 33 luxurious residences, and 28 of them have private railway stations. These residences are surrounded by multiple layers of fencing, connected by underground tunnels, and include bunkers where the leader could hide during an attack. In 2018, a famous real estate developer, who also happened to be a 45th president of the United States, Donald Trump, personally showed Kim Jong-un a short film. The message:
was clear.
Dear Kim, we're ready to offer you and your country the riches of capitalism and massive investments.
We'll pour in so much money that your Pyongyang will compete with Miami. Would you prefer China or Vietnam approach? Both keep communist political control, but their economies thrive under capitalism. Or take Japan as an example. It's the world's third largest economy, with an emperor in a symbolic role. Maybe you'd like something similar. Just please, give up the missiles, okay?
A tempting offer.
And indeed, many leaders, even those with nuclear arsenals, have accepted similar deals. But Kim Jong Un already has all the luxuries he wants. He knows full well. His only real guarantee of personal security is nuclear weapons. Giving them up offers no guarantees at all. In fact, sharks from global capitalism would likely consume him and his system within years. Kim Jong Un was born in 1982, making him old enough, he was 9, to remember clearly how the Soviet Union and Eastern European communist regimes collapsed. He was educated in Switzerland, meaning he knows Western values intimately.
Remember, young Kim was a basketball fan obsessed with Chicago Bulls. Well, when he first came to power, the United States wasn't entirely sure how to handle him. The Obama administration even considered basketball diplomacy, sending the legendary Michael Jordan himself to Pyongyang. But Jordan refused. He said he was afraid of flying. Instead, the man who'd agreed to just about any crazy plan,
Dennis Rodman, ended up going. Rodman visited Pyongyang multiple times, shooting hoops, drinking with Kim, and famously singing him happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you.
In some ways, this basketball diplomacy had its benefits. The world saw that Americans weren't immediately shot upon entering, and North Koreans were quite good at basketball.
But ultimately, for both sides, it was nothing more than a PR show aimed at domestic audience. After several rounds of surface-level friendship between Kim and Rodman, the whole thing died down, precisely because it lacked sincerity. But why does anyone really care about a country that consistently ranks at the bottom of international ratings? Is it genuinely attractive to anyone?
Actually, North Korea serves primarily as a threat, one the international community feels compelled to contain or neutralize. Kim Jong Un and former leaders have done everything necessary to maintain their grip on power, eliminating internal rivals, inventing an ideology that actually works, acquiring a powerful nuclear shield and building a loyal elite,
whose survival depends directly on the regime's continued existence. And all of this fits perfectly with the famous phrase, "Let a few get rich first." Do you know who said that? Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leader who launched massive economic reforms, basically turned China into the world's leading economy. But there is a second part of that phrase that many forget. Let a few get rich first, and then everyone will get rich. But the talent of a perfect dictator is precisely in preventing that. You have to constantly scare the ones who have money, making them believe that without him they would be broke, and to make sure the ones who don't have money can't die of hunger, but also can't get rich, or else they would learn too much and demand power. Thank you. Good night.